clued me into the International Day of Hope. This is the first one, and we've had a few activities going on. We had something at Constellation Studio this morning. About the prints that we made and the sheets that Nick put together. It's just kind of like fun stuff to look at. There's stuff going on in Omaha, and it's just really nice to be able to jump on the bandwagon and celebrate this thing. Who's going to be helping us do this really cool event afterwards, right after we finish talking, get to the real fun stuff, and all the panelists who are participating. My name is Peterson, I'm with Deluxe, and we love to do stuff like this, so I'm just really excited to have you here. I pulled bios for all of our panelists, and they are massive. So actually what I think I will probably do instead is I'll have you guys introduce yourselves really, really briefly. I'll pitch you a starting question. You can say something about yourself, whatever you'd like. Really briefly, we have Kelly Seacrest from Wild Learning Adventures, is that right?
Just Wild Learning.
Wild Learning. Our Charley Friedman, of quite a long legacy in the area and across the country. We have Eric and Jeremiah. Eric runs Nebraska, and I'm sure several other initiatives. And Jeremiah, specifically SCV Play Adventures. I'm not sure what else you might have in your book that you want to talk about. You want to each do like a 2-minute introduction?
Sure, I don't even know if I need that long.
Go for it.
I'll go first since I'm over on this side. My name is Jeremiah. And lead play worker for SCV Adventure Play Foundation, which is like our nonprofit that we had in California. We just moved out to the Lincoln area a few months ago, and we did self-directed play spaces for kids, some permanent, some pop-up kind of style, which you will see later on. And also I've worked with kids in many different capacities, as a preschool teacher, as a counselor, and many different things. I'm also a former TV editor, and just all around guy, just a dad. So yeah, is there?
No.
He, him pronouns, about 5 and 11. Just kidding.
Hi, I'm Larsen-Dockray. I also co-founded the Adventure Play Foundation in Calgary, California. And I also am the co-founding director of Arts with Others, and specifically it's Cali Nebraska Arts Initiative, which grew out of me visiting my hometown of Scottsbluff for the last 12 summers, teaching animation, which has grown into a statewide nonprofit where I teach animation and art, and then also fly out folks from the coast to come and work with students of all ages, creative folks. And I also am a practicing artist. I primarily focus on installation work using my projection, and animation, multimedia, interactivity. And I'm excited to be back in Lincoln. I studied here twice and transferred out twice to study animation. So I love living here, so it's great to be back.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Charley Friedman. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. And my work deals with signs and symbols and how they create value and meaning in our society, and how we agree with this assignation of value. I deal a lot with how art, sacred or holy items, and consumer items all relate to each other, and how they in turn amass and get sucked into how we look at the world through our egocentric point of view. I work in sculpture, installation, performance art, video, and drawing. And I like to think of my favorite material as being humor, not in a funny sense, but in a way how humor lodges in the body and it connects the heart and the mind together. And I'm very interested in emotions and the psychology of being a human and how we all interact with each other. So I'm very concerned about what that interaction is and what happens when that interaction happens. And that's about it. I've been living here since 2011 with my wife, Nancy Friedman Sanchez. We have people around me are into wild learning, right? They stretch out and they want to participate in things. And in bigger city centers, people don't do that because they're just overworked. So I always tell my artist friends, stop paying $1,000 for rent. $200 for rent. Won't get close to that. Who cares? You can fly there. So anyway, that's it.
My name is Seacrest, and yeah, I'm also an artist, and I co-founded Wild Learning. My husband, Pete, there. And yeah, Wild Learning is a self-directed learning space. We use democratic practices like voting to co-create the curriculum, and it's really play-based, nature-based, art-based, and really the sort of foundation is on respecting children's autonomy and conflict resolution.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to have the different perspectives here, and I think they are all connected. I got really excited about this topic. Nick has turned me on to some of the positive psychology movements and really digging into what's, I think, is extremely critical for us at the moment. There's a lot of, in our panel this morning at Constellation, there was a lot of talk about deaths of despair and loneliness and some of the very serious issues that are happening in the broader community. And in general, positive psychology and talking about strengths and talking about some of those things that can help you figure out how to get to your values and how to lead your life are great. But then Nick dropped this great bomb on me, and I'm going to forget the name of the scientist, so you'll figure that out. But this great three-part actionable hope or practical hope framework that consists of having a belief that there'll be something positive in the future, being able to set a framework, an actual framework, and having some agency to really move in that direction. And we can definitely dig into that a little bit more, but as we were talking about it, this idea of play came up, and it really struck me, play and art are both hopeful activities, because you wouldn't make anything if you didn't have some sense that there could be something cool and new brought into existence. And at the same time, what's great about the practical hope framework is it's actionable. It's something you can practice. It's something we talked about this morning. Hope is a muscle. And so these kind of things are real, like you can actually dig your teeth into them. And play and art making, I think, are both great ways to exercise hope building. These are great ways to learn what kind of agency you do have and to play with new ideas and give yourself new ideas about new possibilities. And so that's really the main thing I wanted to kind of see the conversation with, and obviously we can take it in all kinds of different directions. But I want to kick it off to let's start with who's an art maker and embraces that yourself. How do you, is art making a hopeful act for you, and if so, how?
I mean, yes, it's also just sort of in my nature to feel like, and I think it's kind of in our nature to feel like we want to create and make and do, and for me, my art, a lot of my art is very collaborative, so the hopeful part for me is connection with others, and the hope I get from the ability to find out the curiosity about what other people are thinking and the lenses that we see different topics through. But I honestly, a lot of what I find hope with is just connecting people who didn't necessarily know each other before, who I know have similar interests or some sort of connection. That's a big part of it, but also through my art is also connecting with the people who are engaging with it, right? And seeing what they're thinking, how I might inspire them to think about a specific topic. I use play a lot to kind of tap into topics that are hard to enter into, and so that's always interesting to me, is using play as a vehicle and interactivity and engagement in that way. So yeah, I guess I kind of answered your question there, but
There's no spoiler. There's no wrong answer. And I did want to say, I want this to be this is, I've got papers in my hand. It's formalized, but it's not really I want you guys to talk to each other. I I've set the playing field from here on out. It's just whatever we want to talk about, whatever we want to take it. I think that's great. I think that idea of play breaking down barriers that people might perceive as barriers to taking action or
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, when I think of hope, I actually think of it as kind of a hokey thing, right? If there's nothing under it, right? Like you can hope for a better future, and that's a good thing. I do hope for a better future, but I want the seeds to be there. And one of actually the cheapest and revelatory things that we can do, which doesn't cost any money, is to play. And playing, you don't need to buy a toy. Playing is actually looking and staring, picking up something and imagining. And what I have found is that from a very young age, when I wouldn't give myself permission to play and to dream, I would get depressed. I actually would get cynical. And my whole life would kind of begin to metaphorically melt into the ground. And I find when I let myself go off into my own place and dream, and then I become more optimistic, and I'm able to make connections between all the different fibers that feel relevant to my life. And then it does make me feel more hopeful about things, more hopeful about humanity, more hopeful about society, and our ability to change things. And I do think as a society, and actually as a civilization, the best parts of us that have always helped us get over this idea. Right? When 25 years ago, when Apple was a younger company, or maybe 30 years ago, they had that great advertisement called Think Different. Right? Think Different. It was actually gets settled. It becomes more about the market, right? And selling things. We rip out play more and more. And I do like it. I do feel that we have to give permission, not just to children, but to adults and older people. In fact, everybody to play and get things out there and try different things. So to that extent, my whole life, I can make everything about play. That's great. and I'll stop and let someone else talk. But I do think social media, every part of social media is geared so we do not play. It's so we succumb to the drug of just flipping through it. And so now, when I'm in a doctor's office or I'm waiting to get a tooth pulled, instead of going to get sucked into social media, I actually look around the room. And I look around and I observe the space. And that is play too. I think about how corners are coming together, how light values change, and what people are doing. So play is something also that ultimately happens in our mind. We don't have to actually move our hands to play. And I think we have to remember that play is also ultimately a game, it's an intellectual game.
I love that. Kelly, when I was looking at your website to pick up some bio stuff, I got stuck into the FAQ a little bit. And there's a lot of anxiety from parents, or clearly you've had a lot of anxiety from parents about like, you let the kids make these choices, you let the kids make these decisions. And I thought Charley touched on what I think of is like the Pee-wee's Playhouse word of the day. We talked about cynicism this morning a lot as one of those key things, as a block to these things, as a negative view of what could happen. I'm curious, if you could unpack a little bit more like the freedom and the play, and like, I'm sure parents have trouble thinking about what kids are doing as just play, but I don't know, kind of dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you did pick up on a lot of, we do get a lot of anxiety. And I think a lot of it has to do with the undermining of the importance of play, right? And sort of play is so natural. And I would, you talk about maybe giving permission, but I would almost see it more as obstacles have been thrown in our natural instincts. right? And so how do we remove those obstacles? Because children naturally want to play, and it's such a strong instinct. We see it in animals. It is just how we grow, how we learn, how we develop. So it's like one of the most important things that living things engage in order to develop and grow, and ultimately learn how to survive, but also more importantly, learn how to thrive, right? Because play is where, back to sort of what you were talking about with that connection part, right? Play is about connection, agency, and ultimately joy. And those things are so important. You know, talk about sort of wild learning. Like when you look at wilderness, so much of the wild exists for itself. It is existing to be strange and beautiful and just there. And I think play really, when you watch kids play, you see that they are playing not to impress anyone. It's not a performance. It's not to distract themselves. It's to like fully be alive. And so I think there is, you know, also there's just a lot of scarcity. There's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of structural problems, and parents are feeling this need to survive, right, in a capitalist empire, you know, whatever we want to call it. And so the pressure that parents feel, there's very little support for parents and very little support for families. And so that anxiety that parents have, where it's like, my kid needs to read by 6, my kid needs to do this and this and this, it's not because they don't want their kids to play or have joyous lives. It is just this really deep anxiety of, I want my kid to be okay in a world where they're already get them the skills. And so it's that kind of almost more survival mindset, as opposed to like, how do I get my kid to like be wild and thrive, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. Well, and I'm going to bring it over to you because I think there's a lot. I really like the intellectual play that you continue to foster, even in what we would think of as less interactive environments, you know. And obviously some of that is like I think there's been generations of kids being told that play is something you give up at a certain age. And so of course it's also parents that have forgotten how to play. And that's what I wanted to bring in and get your perspective.
Yeah.
You've seen this a lot, you've facilitated these things. Like, what is it like to have the adults rediscover this?
It's amazing, of course, when an adult can be like, wait, this is something that I can do as well. And I think that perhaps okay, so this is an analogy that may fall apart as soon as I say it. But I kind of was starting to think of it earlier today about, you know, like a healthy coral reef that can slowly die away or slowly be eroded or slowly be like poisoned by things as you grow older. And I think that it's like a thing that can be restored to health with certain access, certain spaces. And I do think that Kelly's very right when she's saying that the way that the world can be structured is ratcheted towards less play, more productivity, you know, more of you doing what you have to do. I also sense a lot of in adults a mistrust of themselves because they are getting a lot of these outward influences that they should be sorry, I should please walk that adults should be like watching out because like they're going to have those outward pressures to have their kids perform in a certain way. That's something that I worked with a lot with parents that would come to our adventure playground because we encourage the parents to be there, but not to be like over there telling their kids like how to play, right? Like they could observe, kids could come over to them, but there was a point where we're like, you guys should stay back a little bit. Or I would unofficially like be a liaison as they walk through the yard, and I would end up doing a lot of just narrating and letting them stop trying to control what was happening and just start observing and trying to absorb that. And I think that was a really healthy way for parents to get to know not only their own kids and their own selves, but other people's kids as well. And I think that really fostered a community where parents felt like they were in a safe place too and could look after each other's kids in a way that was beneficial for everybody. Because I feel, one quick other thing is that there's a lot of pressure as a parent, and I know this as a parent, that when your kid is doing something out in public, that anybody can take any certain way that could look badly on you, there's a lot of pressure on you to like tamp that down. You know, like if my kid's being annoying, or if my kid's like, you know, crying, or you know, or playing wrong, or whatever, you know, you want to say, there's a lot of pressure for you to just be not letting anybody else be inconvenienced by this person. And I think that's ultimately what a big lesson of play is too, though, is learning how to exist with other people on this planet. You know what I mean? Because when you're in a place like an adventure playground, or any space where you're playing or are allowed to play, the materials and the space are also in a connection with you and with the people that are in it as well. Sorry, so I'm rambling, but that's
Come on,
That playing wrong reminds me of one of our good friends was at the farmer's market on Wednesday, where, you know, there's like a fountain where it sprays up, and her 4-year-old boy was like, Emma fountain, over the fountain like this. He's like, yeah, with like spraying.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh, maybe you don't want to, but it's like, he's having fun, man, and he's 4, who cares? But like, that pressure of a parent being like, who's watching? Does this look bad?
It's terrifying, and it's important to have a space where it takes time, but when you have access to a space that you can over time build that trust as a community to be like, my kid can come here and be a little wacky, and I can also just be like relaxed about it. I think that's a sign of a really healthy play like ecosystem, I guess. You know what I mean?
I can piggyback a little bit, that's okay.
Good.
On the adventure playground, I think one of the main factors that changed a lot for the parents was just us sharing what we've learned in our playwork practices, just like what's happening in play, like teaching them about educational programming, just talking about like, this is where we are in the play cycle, this is the play cycle, this is that type of play that they're doing right now, and just giving them the language to describe this abstraction, this abstracted act. They took that lens, this new lens of like, oh, this is the natural side of play that I honor, you know, that we should honor. They took that approach, they took that lens home, and it completely transformed how they saw their kids at home playing too. Like, they weren't triggered by their kids being too loud, they weren't triggered by certain things that were triggered before, because they were looking at it through that lens of like, you're inconveniencing someone else, or like understanding that this is really healthy for them to just, let's see this through, right? And trust, trust is a big factor too, just trusting our kids to know like what feels right to them, and you know, that kind of stuff, yeah.
And I will just add one quick thing, is I think that's a good way to invite that back into your life as an adult, is to observe kids in play and not in a judgmental way, in just a way that lets you like relax a little bit and be like, yeah, this is actually very natural. And even though sometimes people get hurt, or sometimes, you know, like something goes awry or whatever, you know, I mean, that happens anywhere. But it is a place where you're allowed to fail, you know, and you make it as safe to fail as you can, right? For a space like that.
And risk-benefit assessment was a huge part too, is like assessing the benefit of a risk, whether it's for your kids or even for yourself, like weighing that to that there can be benefit might outweigh whatever risk might potentially happen.
Risk could be like climbing a tree, but it also could be like asking kids you don't know to play with them.
Yeah.
There's so many different kinds of risks that we would encourage people to take. Because a risk is a different thing. A hazard is like a nail sticking out of a board, right? So we would go through and take all those things out of the equation as much as we could possibly do, and then encourage them to take those risks. And I think, you know, that's a hopeful. It's a setup for hopeful actions, right? You know, a kid that wants to go on a big rope swing. One of my favorite things in the world is when they decide they're not ready for it yet, because you let them get to a point where they decided, I'm not ready. Because when you tell them they're not ready, that's taking away their ability to set those boundaries in their own, life. But sorry, that's getting off a little bit of the track, but yeah.
But it all goes. I mean, it's not, but the thing is, if we as a society want to protect every single beer, every single friend, then children won't learn. They will not learn how to go out and take risks and to think outside the box. I mean, okay, you might you might break your arm. So what? You understand that gravity works.
Well,
And you'll be able to protect yourself. I mean, but if you don't play beyond an extreme, playing is about going beyond. There's an extreme aspect to play. It's built into it, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, humans are curious people. You take a crayon and you draw, eventually you're going to suss it, and you're going to see if you can melt it, I mean, it's just part of it. But we have to give them permission to do it when they're younger and call it play, because then when they get a little bit older, it becomes more dangerous. It becomes getting into this car and speeding, right? It becomes playing around with a weapon. You have to learn when you're younger those limitations.
Yeah, it does remind me literally of you saying a broken arm. An early proponent of adventure playgrounds in the London area, her name was Lady Allen Herwood, and her famous quote that in the adventure play community resonates, but it's also kind of scary. She said, "Better a broken arm than a broken spirit."
Exactly.
And that's something that always is just like, it's such a challenging thing to say, but also just so resonant, with this kind of play behavior.
I suspect that one of the reasons that play gets put in the box it's in right now is because it's easy to see the risk side of it. And it's also really hard to see the outcome side of it. And we're super keen about like how play leads to structure and leads to a roadmap for what their kids are going to do next and all that other stuff.
Well, I think all of you really made such excellent points about trust, right? That out of play comes your boundaries and how to communicate your boundaries. Out of play comes, what are my limits? What is it you like to push past those limits? Out of play comes communication. And so play really is the space where children, human beings, and not just children, but lots of animals, right, learn how do I fit into this society? How do I be who I am? What is that sort of tension between belonging and authenticity? And I think a lot of that comes down to trust, and I think whether we call it chatterism or adultism, essentially like oppression of children, really comes down to so much of the orientation towards children is one of control, because they're either seen as, they're rebels, they're dangerous, or they don't know anything, or their property, right? And so this feeling of control, we felt it as we were kids. And so when you grow up as an adult, it's really hard to engage into play because you may have been punished for it, right? Maybe, but there's lots of different ways that play sort of gets taken away or discouraged. And so I think building back that trust is what really play does. You learn to trust yourself, you learn to trust other people, you learn to trust community. And I think that can really then provide. If you've ever seen, while learning, sometimes we joke that it's just a school about meetings, because what they're doing so much of the time is talking about what are the rules, what are the expectations, checking in, I don't think that's fair, we have to stop. And it's so much, people talk, it's the school where you get to do whatever you want, there's no rules. Wild learning has so many rules because the kids come up with their own rules through consensus decision making, and a lot of those rules, the origin is a play moment, right? Where it's like, we were jumping over this wire and someone got hurt. Let's bring that up at the meeting to come up with rules. And so through play comes boundaries, structures. You can't really have, there's a great quote, we were talking to an educator in New York, where she's like, you actually can't have freedom unless you know where the boundaries are.
Sure.
Because if you're just terrified because you don't know, I don't know where this ends, I don't know where this begins, right? Like, you can't actually move or make decisions, so.
Yeah, I really, there's a lot of ways that play is taken away, I feel like, in some of those be in a certain place, like we have to go to Disneyland or we have to buy toys, and where a lot of the imagination is taken out of the play, and it's just kind of reduced to, well, this action figure is only able to do like one thing, and it's going to be to fight this other guy, because that's what they do in the cartoon show. It takes a lot out of what you're doing, but if you have like a bunch of, sticks and leaves and stuff, like who knows what you would come up with. I mean, I've had kids take sticks and leaves and make masks, make costumes, make little tiny people that lived on stick huts, and just depending on the day, depending on the whim, giving like that creativity space to just like foster that a little bit. It just lets that fire grow, and you have to trust that through that initial chaos of being in a space together, that you might, like it when we run like events like a pop-up adventure playground, you have to know in yourself as a play worker the first like 30 minutes or however long it's going to be, everybody just kind of getting to know each other. And if you look at that first 30 minutes and you say like, oh man, it's just not going like I wanted it to, but that's as soon as everybody clicks in place and then realizes like, okay, there's not an infinite amount of X, Y, or Z, so I have to talk to this other person over here, and it starts to become this connection between people, or a ball rolls next to somebody else and they like throw it back to you, that play cue has been answered, and now we're in this ecosystem, this flow state. People might have heard of like the flow state for creating art. It's the same thing with play in a lot of ways. You can get to this flow state where things are constantly being like, returned and sent back and like made into something that's way more cool than something you would have done, on your own, or with just like one toy that told you how to play with it, So.
I have two reactions that aren't really questions, and I'll let you guys decide how you want to react to them. But one is, as you guys are talking, and I keep coming back to this idea that you mentioned in the beginning, Charlie, that play as an adult being either an intellectual game or in my case, it's a social game. I've really gotten interested in meeting other groups of people because it leads to stuff like this. Having a coffee with someone and just hearing about what they're up to, and I realized I was talking about community and all these things, but I realized that's my play these days. That's how I explore new possibilities without any expectation that they did, where they had an instructor come in and one group of kids and they had a toy and they're like, here's how you do this thing kind of thing. And they're like, here's the three things you need. And I'm going to see those toys out there and wants to respond.
A lot of playgrounds are bolted to the ground and these expectations of this is how you use it. And I think one of the cool things about kids, right, back to the idea of hope is this sort of combination of like being in reality but also using your imagination to see beyond it. I mean, you always see kids climbing up the slide, right? Like they're always trying to use it, or like if you've ever known anyone who's actually played with Barbies as a kid, you know you're not just like my Barbies, like you come up with like dramatic Victorian drama, like someone's an orphan, and someone, and there's just like, there is that, the attentive limitation, and then I think kids are always past that, and it's really always, I think, again, being an adult, how that's can be so inspiring, because I think a lot of times we can get into that limitation, and kids are really good at, okay, but what about this? What if I use the slide like this, Yeah.
And it's really interesting when you're an adult, like helping foster. You got it all figured out. You think how your kids are going to react to certain things in your life. I mean, I remember, this is a story I tell sometimes, it's like there was one day I had a certain amount of materials and I was just fooling around in the playground before the kids showed up, and I was like, you know what, I bet one of them's going to want to play golf today. So I like took all this time to like dig this like hole, and I put like this coffee can like in the ground with a little flag sticking out, and I had some balls nearby and like whatever, and the kids like all showed up and whatever, because I don't remember what inspired that for me, but I was like, this will be fun. We had golf balls, and I was like, yeah, this will be funny, and I had a little thing to whack the balls with, not a real golf club, but yeah, the kids like showed up and they're like, hey, what up, man? And then finally, like I waited and nobody even saw it. I was just kind of waiting there, and finally a kid saw it and he's like, oh, cool, and he runs over and just like pulls the can out of the ground and just like starts doing this whole different thing with it. And I was just like, okay, lesson learned. You know, I was telling them they should play golf when I should have been like, here's things that you could play golf with, and maybe you'll figure that out on your own. But I think that was a lesson that I was just like learned in the moment, that like kids have an amount of imagination that you can't fully recall as an adult, and I think it's more of us just striving to like be in the zone of that, because when you're an adult, all the other things in the world swirling around and responsibilities that you have just make it a lot harder to get back, you know, focus, which is why we need to work as a group to hopefully, you know, allow each other to be in a state like that, where we are kind of fumbling through and kind of figuring those things out again.
And I think that's the importance of artists, right? Like, as adults, like, even though, you know, you're no longer children, like, artists do bring that level of imagination, I think. And
For sure.
you can, like, get back into that sense of play.
Yeah, and when I so one of the things because I also teach animation and teach media art, and one of the, learning about playworking and researching, seeing the research of playworking on adventure playgrounds in Europe and beyond, one of the things that changed everything for me was the purpose of an adventure playground as a playworker is that you're to try to help support the kids get into a flow state in their play. And when I started like applying that same lens to my classroom, I was like, my purpose here is that every kid does like a and they're just taking it in. And so much of it is just like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine if this was how we looked at learning in the US, like that the purpose of the learning space in our classroom is that the kids are there in flow state and it's not the specific product, you know. I think that, look left differently.
Well, I think to jump on what you're saying there, the flow state, the other F word that we don't want to talk about is failure. And a society which is overconsumed with end results and with answers. It has to equal forward. And we do not want to put ourselves in a place where 2 + 2 can actually equal 9 3/4. And play is in and of itself takes ownership of that. It is not so we have to do this. It is not you have to play. Humans, we're able to speak as many different languages as we can speak. You don't have to be born in a specific country. You're capable of doing anything. And of course, we get molded in that. When I was in middle school, I used to tell the children and the parents, I used to say, your child will be graded on how well they fail. You know? Oh, not how great they complete this art project, which was meaningless. It's how well they fail. Well, how do you know? It's because you take risk. It's because I see you working. Man, it didn't work out that time, but I had a great time doing it, and now I know what to do later on. And it's so important to be able to embrace those words, that evil word that we don't want to, right? Because we're pushing for the 2 + 2 not only is 5, the 2 + 2 is A. You know, then I can get an A, and then I can get to the next level. And so we're missing out on the other part, right? And that other part is so vital. And that's that.
And what if there is this like uncertainty? That's what coping is, right? Like I'm comfortable with something ambiguous or not being totally in control, and so I think you're totally right that fear of failure is so, you know, it just really is so restrictive.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible. I don't, I mean, when I'm in the studio, just to take it there are so many pieces that I start out that become very laughable. I'm like, well, that didn't work. You know, I was going to make an alligator out of baguettes. It didn't work. It didn't work. But it was like, but it takes you then to another place where there's something else that does work. You work through problems. There are so many materials, so many ideas. And it's so important, so valuable. It goes back to what we can do as a society to give ourselves permission to go through all those different levels of that. And the other thing, the other evil word is there's an S word that I also give. I never say that anything is stupid, right? Because also as a society, that's another coded language for shutting down. Failure and stupid. So those are two words that I will never ever take ownership over, right? Nothing is ever stupid, and there's never a failure. All of those things are just permission to go one step further, to learn, to laugh, to joy, to sit in a corner and to feel the pain of not being able to get something complete. But it's all part of it, right? And then ultimately you do get to a different place. You learn, you know, and then you get something, you know, and yeah.
I'm gonna take this topic and kind of just turn it a little bit, because I feel like when we look at how adults play, the idea of failure and success is being commodified now and is being used against us, that one success keeps us going, right? And one of the things is when I was studying animation, my undergrad was parallel with video game design. And I remember a lot of my students, or not students, my folks in the program with me were telling me about part of that program. This was a while ago. This was like 2000, 2001. Was how to make it addictive. Like that's part of the design. A well-designed video game is that it's addictive. Your player never wants to stop playing. And that was 25 years ago, and where we are now. And I think that that's like that idea of like the commodification of play in that way, but also like the research that is towards like video game design and things like that. It is still very like trended towards that. And it's been like I've had to grapple with that, especially now that I've learned so much more about how vital play is, and to see it being, I don't know, there's a strong word for it, of like, like what's kind of being done for play for adults, and the scrolling is like, that's the play, is like, yes. And so, I don't know, I just feel like that's an element we bring up, because that is keeping us from just going out and being in a park. As adults, there are public spaces, but we'll sit there and while our kids play or something like that. But I feel like that's something that I grapple with a lot. Yeah.
I will say, I want to there's great energy. I want to keep some Q&A time going for a little bit, but there's also a lot of young energy and maybe some old restless energy as well. He's setting up out there. Anyone who would like to go out into the parking lot and start getting their hands dirty, absolutely welcome to pop out and do that. Anyone wants to hang out? Anyone wants to hang out and do a little more Q&A? Maybe we can do another 5-10. We'll see how they're feeling, and we'll just provide it out. But yeah, don't feel like you have to sit here and wait. All right. Are there any questions that anyone else would like to pose or interjections?
I just want to make a comment, and also because I'm a dancer, and we use movement as a primary source to play, explore, and have that failure, or sense of failure. Well, we say that as other possibilities.
Yeah.
But like this idea of three-dimensionality that I think you're bringing in, like we tend to, for mean, I'm probably not gonna sit there sit like this if I'm in Korea. Probably have to do more formal way to present myself, and so really like refreshing that interdisciplinary in the sense that we kind of have similar idea with different language, maybe.
For, yeah, well, there's no doubt about it, you know, and we have to follow those, like, we're saying, like, creativity happens within boundaries, right? It happens within a kind of structure, right? And older people, we have to do that, right? But there's an interesting thing, like, I go to Colombia a lot to visit family, because Nancy's from there, and people definitely walk differently, ask differently, give money differently, but there's still ways where you can play around with that, right? In a way, is an acknowledgement, right? Creativity, there's also a creative way to acknowledge a certain kinds of set of rules and then play it, right? And in that way, and that nuance, being go outside those boundaries a little bit, helps us then reflect, right? It gives us, those are the little mirrors, right, that show us who we are. And we need those mirrors. Right? We need to know where those boundaries to go a little bit farther. Right? Sometimes, like, I love I love music, and some of my favorite bands, when I look at them, some of my favorite albums are the albums where they haven't quite figured out something. They've almost figured out their thing, but they haven't quite. So they have one or two albums where they're kind of playing around outside the boundaries a little bit, and all of a sudden they figure out their formula and they get boring. And they sell many copies and they're happy. I don't listen to them anymore. But that little wiggle room that happens. That's the reflectors going on, you know? But we still have to do that.
Yeah, so I was just fascinated by the way that you describe your work in a way that probably I describe in the dance world, but at the same time that Marskania, like, famous choreographer, who also ask the dancers to learn commission to break it. So how can you and still have that positive mindset to learn about convention to break it, but also the culture comes in. How do you know that convention is convention? If you don't know that way of convention. So just throwing that out.
I love that, and I wanna kick it off. I really wanna respond to that, because I felt this very much growing up, that we all, as adults, we all understand the rules, but if you haven't yourself found that boundary and like mapped it a little bit, it's just something that's like, you don't really understand it. And there's been a lot of boundaries that I realized were not actually there when I actually went to go try to find them. And I think that's fascinating, like the kids get a chance to do that at that age. And developing their own. Like, it's just so fascinating to me.
Well, I think, that's sort of, you just sort of made the difference of what does it feel like to have a rule imposed on you versus a boundary that you co-create or that arises out of your actual experience. And I think when those boundaries are co-created or they come out of your actual experience, they're there they really help you, right, make decisions. Whereas when a rule is imposed on you, it feels either confusing, stifling, or your natural response is to push back, right? Because it feels like your autonomy is being robbed. So I think that's a really good decision of like these conventions of dance, right? Knowing what they are, but then able to, instead of going around them with intention, right? Or following them with intention, you're doing something with purpose.
So I just want to jump in. So in the playworking world, they have this concept of a play frame, and frame is kind of what you're talking about, except for in playworking, the frame can change at any moment. So the frame of play can be a physical boundary in space, like a box on the floor, a football field. It can also be a social space. It can be a psychological space. But you create the frame, in the play, and then that frame can last a second. We've seen play frames on the adventure playground last an entire year, and it's literally just a cue and response. And as soon as that play cue is responded, a frame is created. And that concept, I was just like, wow, like it's there. And then when you see interactions, whether it's play or anywhere in the world, even with animals, the idea that is the frame of play, it's like that's
being able to formulate a pathway and being able to believe that you have agency to help make that happen. So many of the boundaries that we think exist in our society make it hard to set goals that are beyond those boundaries, or even envision that that's a possibility. And I think so much of the power here is to be able to like explore, what you thought was a 100-foot wall is really just an intermittent wall that only exists here and here. And like the cultural thing here, so you can go around it, you can play with it, you can bend it, and it gives you avenues to set goals that don't currently feel like they could exist. But absolutely, the cultures change all the time.
Yeah.
Organic, all this stuff. I think that's a really critical piece to how like you can work hope, envision new possibilities, and maybe even see ways that you have agency that you didn't before, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, and as a society, I mean, we're bound to go through ebbs and flows. When mass-produced ceramics were becoming popular in Japan, there was a great scare among artisans. Like, oh my gosh, everything is cheap and beautiful. So I believe that it's called, so wabi-sabi started. This idea of, oh my god, that's my fingerprints in here. Let's keep it, we want to keep it. It's this whole new aesthetic of chance opened up, of showing the human element. So I hope that at some point we will kind of naturally, the pendulum will begin to shift as a society away from some of these things. We might, as you mentioned, forest, nature is the greatest, it is creativity in a nutshell. Maybe we'll decide that we need to go out and hike more, to explore more, to drink from streams. There might be a greater, right, there might be a push towards that free-form element because our world is so full of video games and AI and whatnot. So who knows? I mean, this whole thing today is given opportunity to that. That's what it's all about, right?
It is. Any last questions? I think this is an amazing place to stop. I really want to appreciate all of you, everyone who showed up, but I really want to appreciate you guys giving me time and feedback. I've been super inspired. I'm very jazzed up. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen outside when we take some of this creativity out and to see what they've been already working on, because I'm sure they've already set sort of the place-based boundaries for us. So.
And thank you for giving us the opportunity to do a pop-up in Lincoln. We weren't expecting that, so
Yeah,
it's
well,
really great to be bringing
also,
our practice here.
Nick, the inspiration, and there's going to be one of these every year from now on. So, look forward to it.